Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Caffe Lena. Thank you for joining us tonight for our Storytellers evening. We have some friends in the room tonight. We also have some friends online watching from home. So welcome. We're happy that you're here, and we are going to get started. If you are unfamiliar with our storytelling format, this has traditionally been an open mic where there has been a featured storyteller, and during the pandemic we transitioned to a format where there were 3 featured tellers, each with their own microphone and each with a slightly longer set. And that is, for the time being, what we are sticking with. So tonight we have 3 storytellers. 2 of them are going to collaborate a bit, which you will see as we go on. They will explain to you how they're going to do it. First up, we have Cassidy, and then Siri, Allison, and Kelvin Keraga are going to finish out the night. So please welcome Betty up to the stage and have a wonderful evening with our storytellers. Oh, and I should mention that for our online viewers, there is a tip jar which you may use. It is caffelena.org/tips, and it goes directly to our storytellers tonight.
Welcome. I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to see so many of you. And I've got a lot to say, so I better get going. I really want to talk about, first of all, something about story tales and stories and how important they are in all our lives. That's the kind I want to cover. And after me, the other 2 wonderful storytellers will be doing probably very different, very exciting things. But first of all, there was a time several years back where I went to a workshop for storytellers because I wanted to learn more. And this man was there whom people told me was a very important person, and he was going to help us learn more. So he came out and said, yes, storytelling is very important. Everybody is a storyteller. And he said, now what I want you to do, now this was brand new then, but it's done a lot in other places and all over now. What I want you to do is when I say a word, I want you just to think about it for about maybe a minute or 2. And from there, I want you to think about where you would get a story from this. So I'm going to give you a word in just a few minutes. Well, I got thinking about that, and I got thinking, he's very brilliant. I better come up with something so I'll sound bright and have something really to say. And I'm thinking about, what should it be? What should it be? Should it be save the world? Anything else like that? What should I be? What should it be? And finally, but just in a second, he came back and said, all right, is everybody ready? Hang on, here's the word. And I held my breath, and he said, the word is shoes. And I said, shoes? Who can come up with a story about shoes? That's pretty stupid. I don't know what he's talking about, but then I remembered when I was a graduate from high school, when I was just finishing, my father was taking me on a ride for my summer job. He was taking me to a little resort space which hired a lot of new workers, and I had to follow all the orders, though, if I wanted the job. And one of the orders was you had to wear the uniform that was assigned, and the other order was, guess what? You had to wear a certain kind of shoe. And it was the ugliest shoe I had ever seen. It looked like you were walking on white boxes. And it had all sorts of things I thought wrong with it, but I couldn't say no, because I desperately needed this job. We had figured out what it was going to cost. My parents had almost no money. But with everything that we worked on, it was going to be okay, and I was going to get away and go to this college. Everything was covered except probably food and an extra book now and then. So I had to have this job so I could do that. So I got there. My father left. A bunch of us stayed in the house with them. That woman, a woman was running it for a bunch of workers there. And in the first 3 days on that job, it was wonderful because someone helped us, an older woman who had been working as a waitress for years, helped us and showed us how to do this, how to do that. Well, she mostly did most of it herself, so it looked so easy. And on day 4, when she said, "You're on your own," my white shoes went clunking across the floor, and I was ready. But I couldn't understand what the person was saying when they said what they wanted to order. I couldn't lift the tray hardly when I finally did get it. I was doing something wrong, it seemed like all day long, and the day went forever and ever and ever, and I was exhausted. And I thought, I'm never going to make this. I've got to make it. So I went back the next day and the next day and the next day. And finally, I realized, okay, you're going to do this. Just remember the shoes, because every day the owner of the restaurant had yelled at me because there was a spot of dust or dirt or something on my shoes, and she wanted them to be perfect. So I spent a lot of money on shoe polish. Every day I polished up those shoes. And every day I would go to work. And the days got better and better and better, and the money got higher and higher and higher, and it worked out well. I survived that first year. And so did the shoes. And I went back the next year, and I had to polish the shoes a little bit more and a little thicker, but we made it. And the third year, and the fourth year, my last year in college, my last year working as a waitress, because I had decided, watching those older women working, that I never wanted to do it as a full-time job. They were very old. They were probably 39 or so, that kind of old. But there it was. It was over. It was done. I had graduated from college, and my father and mother were there to see the ceremony, and then were going to take me home for a little while. And my father said, "Let's go back and look in your room and make sure you didn't leave anything here." So I went in, and there were a couple of books that I was going to give to someone else, but they weren't there, so I guess they didn't want them, so I picked them up. And as I looked over in the corner by the trash bin, there they were, the shoes. They didn't even look like shoes anymore. They were so bent and twisted and everything else. And the leather on top was all worn off, and the color had never been really white for a long time. And I looked at them, and I picked them up, and I said, "Thanks. We made it." And we did. And I've been very careful about shoes for a long time after that. But that's one way when I learned how important it was to find a story out of just a word or two. And then soon I learned that I could learn a lot myself just from listening to stories and created stories. So this led me up to about 3 years after this point with the shoes, 3, 4 years. By that time, I had finished college, of course, then. Then I had gotten married, and then we had had a baby, and we had moved to Philadelphia area. And it was a whole different life. And we had this baby who'd been kind of a surprise, hadn't expected that to clean up my life or clear out my life that soon. But we had decided that it wasn't going to change our life that much because we knew how to handle things, right? I was only like 22. I could do anything. But this child, who was very handsome and very beautiful, as a real infant, began to be the loudest kid you ever heard scream. For hours, it seemed like, and hours. And I took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, there's nothing wrong with him. Just let him cry. And I said, I can't do that. I live in a little apartment, and half the people there are old, and I can't let him keep them awake. Well, do something, because just let him cry a lot. It's good for him, and you'll be better. Well, he did get a little better, and things were improving a little bit. But then there was this day when my husband wasn't going to be coming home that night because he had to stay over for some kind of a workshop or something. So it was just the baby and me that day, and it was a lovely day, and we were out with the stroller most of the day, and giving him a lot of fresh air and me a lot of fresh air. And finally, I thought, I think he's probably getting tired, we went back, wheeled back there to the apartment. And by this time, the baby was getting a little sleepy, but he fed first. He always eats. And then he went to sleep. He was asleep. And I was all alone with time just to think about things. And I could have dinner, but I had forgotten to stop at the store. And we had almost no food in the house. I had been going to stop that afternoon. So I looked out the window. The store was right next to this house we were living in. You could look right down and see. It was only like a little block, from my back door to their back door. And I was never too good at math, but I figured that you could walk over in a second or two. So I figured, if I got my money out and was ready to just throw it on the counter. They know who I am. I just say, I'll see you tomorrow to see if this was all right. I could buy something, some food for me, and then I could come home. And it would only take 3 minutes. 1 minute to get down, 1 minute to be across there and throw that money out, and then a minute to come back. I'm going to do it. And then I checked on the baby. He was sound asleep, looking beautiful. Very heavily sleeping. So I got my money, and I put it in my pocket, and I went to the door, and then I went back and looked. He was fine. So I went back to the door, and I started down the stairs when all of a sudden I thought, what if the building blows up now? And my baby's in there. Oh, well, that's stupid, I said. That's stupid to think that. So I walked down 2 more steps, and I thought, what if there's someone in that store who's robbing them, and he's got a gun, and he won't let me go, and my baby will be shot, or I'll be shot, or something will happen. That's stupid. I'll go one more. I'm almost down. And as I made the next 2 steps, I looked over, and a woman had just walked out of that store, and she tripped over something and fell down, and a couple people raced to pick her up, and I thought, if that's me and no one's around, it might knock me out, and no one would know when I came to it. There's a baby up there. So I turned around and ran upstairs. And I learned very quickly that if you've got a jar of peanut butter and you scrape and scrape at the insides of it, you can pull out enough to cover like a piece of stale bread. So I had my dinner with, I think it was some leftover lemonade, which had been left over too long. And I sat there thinking about life and everything, and you know how brilliant I was supposed to be at age 22, how I could figure everything out. Well, you know what I figured out? This kid will be right with me for 5 years at least, till he goes to kindergarten. I don't know. I thought we were going to be brilliant parents. But I think there's a whole lot to parenting that I don't know anything about. And I never did get to the store that night, of course. But it was a good lesson. I learned that even as 22, you can't be smart enough to be a parent all the time. Thank you. Now, my last story is completely different, but it's a story I learned from someone else, and I think it's pertinent to the times at almost any time. A young man told me the story of what his life had been lately. He had been in the Army for 2 different sections. He had done lots and lots and lots of work in the Army, in all parts of it, in evil, terrible places. Times when he was scared stiff, times when he was mad at the world. Things were not right. He'd spent most of his time in Vietnam. And he finally was coming home. And he was very lucky because he physically was not injured at all. And he didn't seem to have any of these problems with mental health that many of our people are having who had been serving in these kinds of situations. But he wasn't quite ready to join the world, his world. He didn't want to go back with his family and his parents and his friends and his job and join into where just he had been before. He needed something else. And he was lucky then, because while he was away, his elderly aunt had died, and she'd left him an old farm that no one had bothered with for years. But she recalled that when he was a little boy, he had liked to come visit her. So she left it to him, and he was delighted. He was very delighted. He went right to work on that place. First thing he looked was a hole in the roof over his bed, so he could fix that up. And he started planning everything he would do and working hard every day and just beginning to feel really good. And then he realized, well, he didn't know a lot about some of these things you need to know if you're doing things like this. So he hired a neighbor from down the street who had just retired, who had spent 30 years working in a hardware store and was very familiar with the stuff that Jim needed. So he hired him, and they got along just fine because neither one of them talked to one another much. When Sam showed up for work in the morning, he and Jim just decided, well, today we'll do this, and that's it, and they did it, and they were both happy and went home. Well, one day, Jim had to go into town, this little town not far away, and he had to go to the grocery store and the bank and so forth. And on the way, he saw something out of the corner of his eye as he was driving, and he couldn't be sure what he had seen. And he thought he might have heard a funny noise, but he stopped, got out of the truck, walked around, hearing this noise get louder and louder, and there was a crow, one of the biggest crows he'd ever seen, lying there, wounded somehow, and moaning in ways not like a caw, but moaning in ways of something suffering so badly. He didn't quite know what to do, but he realized he had a box in the back of his truck. He had to get it off that road, near that road, and so he went and got that, and got the crow, and carried it back, and put it in the box. And then he drove it home, thinking about it all the time. And when he got home, he remembered they had a big plastic box that some supply had come in, and he filled that with old paper towels, so be quieter and better for the crow, and put him in it. And then he stood there and said, what do I do next? I don't know anything with crows. I don't even know what they eat. But he did then what we all do now. He went right to his computer, and he spent long, long time reading about crows, probably more than he needed to. And then he went to bed. Nothing more he could do. He couldn't get the crow to eat, drink any water, or eat even a little teeny piece of banana. So he went to bed, and the next morning he woke up and that noise was on there. His workman came and he showed him and said, "What do you think? How do you think he's going to last?" "I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with him, but he looks very bad." "Well, we'll see what happens." So the next day was about the same, but on the day 4, all of a sudden he woke up and there was silence. Silence. No sound. He must have died. So Jim got up and went and looked in this room, and no. This big crow was sitting there staring at him as if to say, "Where's my breakfast?" And he ate, and he drank something. And from that day on, everything, he got better and better and better. By the end of the second week, he was outside with Jim and Sam when they worked near the house, and they would prop him up on the railings along the house, and he'd claw onto that and just sort of sit there and watch him for a while. By the next week or so, he was flying a little bit. By the week after that, he was flying more. And by week 6 or 7, he was flying all the way up and around and making noises and singing and in his caw-caw manner. And he was recovered. They didn't know how or why, but they were pleased to see this. And Jim said, "You know, I'm getting used to having him around the house. I talk to him all the time." But then by around day 7.5, maybe day 8, the 8th week rather, something happened, and he began to fly differently. And he began to look around all the time and make different noises, cawing differently. And he'd jump up like this and go round and then come swooping down. And once in a while this way, swooping down. And this went on and on and on. And it got stronger, and his voice got stronger every day. And the next day, while Jim and Sam were out working way at the edge of the property, he came there with them, and he went around and round and round and cawed and swooped down closer than he had ever been with them before. And then with a very loud claw and caw, he went up like this and headed off in that direction. And they stood and they waited and they waited and they waited, and they couldn't see him anymore. And he was gone. And Jim said, "Well, what do you think, Sam?" "I think he's going. I think he's gone." "Why? Why would he leave? We were good to him here." "Yeah, but you got to notice, he did most of his traveling here with his arm. And when he left, he went this way. So what?" "Well, I think he's going back home. I think that's probably where there are other crows where he wants to be." "Oh," said Sam. And he was quiet for a minute. And then he said, "You know what? I just figured something out. That crow needed time to recover. He needed us to help him get better. And once he got better, he didn't want to stay with us. He wants to go back with his family. And you know what? I think I'm ready for that. I think I'll still work on this farm, but I'm ready to join the group." And that's the story. Thank you. And next, you've got the two famous storytellers who give you a completely different kind of performance here. So, thank you.
Yeah, just the one.
Okay. You can move it over, right?
Okay, yeah. I love that story about the crow. One thing I like about it is, whenever you find a hurt bird, it's very hard to help them live. So I've heard that story before, and I like to hear that the crow lives. Never mind the guy, but the crow too. And Betty and Margaret teach classes on how to tell personal stories. Are you going to teach those again sometime? Yeah. I got a personal story out of that, and I don't tell many personal stories. But I agree with Betty. Everybody has a story to tell. And so I'll tell you where I got this one that I'm going to tell. I got it from another storyteller, a friend, Al Chica, who tells stories here at Open Mic. And he told it some years ago, and I just loved the story. And so he said, sure, you can tell it. And where he got it from was a children's book. And that book was a compilation of syndicated children's pages in a newspaper. So newspapers, children's books, friends, there's a lot of places to get stories from. And this publication, it said it was published in the newspaper November 21st, 1999, and it said it was a fable, a creation story, a folk tale from East Africa. I do not think it is a folk tale from East Africa, but I'm telling you that that's what they said. So as we're learning now, we storytellers, to be a little more careful in taking somebody's culture and just saying that's what it is. So anyway, at the beginning, near the beginning of the world, there were these two mythic characters, sort of superhuman, a woman, Bima, and her husband, Utnik. And they had an idea about how society ought to be organized, how the world ought to be, how people ought to live together. And that was, they thought that there should be one law, the law of love. Not to be mushy-gushy, but active love. To see the other people around you and to care for their best outcomes. And if you really did that, then you wouldn't need all these other laws about don't do this and don't do that, because you would want to help them and you wouldn't want to hurt them. So they were all excited about trying this out, and they needed to find a place to make it happen. So they set out on a journey to find this perfect place. And they took with them 2 cows, 2 sheep, 2 goats, 2 pigs, the root of a banana tree, and a sweet potato, which is, of course, the root of a sweet potato vine. And they traveled for weeks across grassy plains, fording rivers, skirting dangerous deserts, climbing mountain passes. And one day, cresting one of those mountain passes, they saw laid out before them a beautiful valley. And here I always think about that valley when you come from Easton, when you come from Troy, New York, for anybody on Zoom who doesn't know this area, Troy, New York to Greenwich, and you're coming up 40 and you look out west and see that Easton Valley. That's what I think of. So they saw this gorgeous valley. This was the place. They went down, they planted their banana tree, they planted their sweet potato, they built a little house. The animals multiplied, they had children, the children grew up, and they had children, and they grew up, and they had children. And now I'm thinking of, wayfarers coming in over the mountains to expand the gene pool. Well, whatever. They ended up, after some years, with a thriving farming community. And the people being taught from very small that this was the one law, to love each other. It worked. The people cooperated and shared and supported, and there didn't need to be any other law. It was absolutely perfect. Until. There is always an until. Until they ran out of land. It seemed to come upon them as a surprise. All of a sudden, this latest generation of children didn't have any freely available land to just move on to and start a new farm. And so they had to divide the land. That, of course, caused jealousy and resentment and backroom deals and lying about the backroom deals and grabbing and stealing even. And then some people decided that, well, stealing was easier than working. So with fewer workers, the crops didn't grow as well, and then there wasn't as much to eat, and then people were hungry, and then they really were stealing, and then there was a murder. The valley stopped at that. And everyone said, this cannot go on. We mustn't live like this. We need laws. Now, Bhima and Utnik were still alive. They were old, but as I told you, they were sort of a superhuman, and they were still there. And they traveled through the valley talking to everyone in kitchens, in fields, and meeting houses. No, if people want to hurt each other, they are going to do it whether we have laws about it or not. What we need is for people to want to care for each other, to want to help each other. The one law, remember that one law, the law of love. Well, people revered Bhima and Utnik, so they smiled politely. But as soon as Bhima and Utnik were out of earshot, they said, those crazy fools. Well, they might have had a crazy idea, but Bhima and Utnik were not fools. They knew what everybody was saying. So one night, at midnight, they dug up the root of a banana tree, and they dug up a sweet potato. And taking with them 2 cows, 2 pigs, 2 goats, and 2 sheep, they walked into the foothills and disappeared into the mountains. Some days later, the people realized they were missing, and then they weren't coming back. And they were distraught. I mean, they had been deserted by their founders. They said, well, I guess we'll have to try again to live by this law of love business. And they had meetings all over the valley. And at various meetings, people stood up, 12 different people, as a matter of fact, and said, I am the best qualified to lead in the absence of Bhima and Utnik, and I will do it. I'll take on the job. And people lined up behind these 12 people and made factions and drew swords and spears, and then unto the fray. There was war in this valley. And when finally one leader was standing and the others weren't, the fighting stopped. But you could hardly say that this person had won, because there wasn't anything left to lead. The houses were burned, the farms were ruined, the animals were starving, the children were crying. It was just an awful time, and it lasted for a very long time. Finally, the rebuilding went slowly, and there was a new generation of children who didn't remember anything about the war. And they listened to these stories about Bhima and Utnik and the ancient idea of this law of love. And they decided they wanted to try to live like that. And so they worked at it, and they supported and shared and tried to see each other and work for each other's best. And it worked. And they had this flourishing valley, and a leader arose, a young woman named Manda. And everything was going so well. And Manda worked really hard. And when she had some time off, what she liked to do was go walking in the foothills by herself to have some free headspace. But her advisors and her servants did not like her going off by herself. They talked to her about sprained ankles and getting lost and wild animals and falling rocks. And she said, shush, I need to go off by myself. So she went. Now, she had an elderly servant who worried about her. And he thought he came up with a good idea. He would honor her request to go by herself, and he would follow her, but far enough behind that she didn't know he was there. And then if anything happened to her, he would be there to take care of her. So one day, she was going off, and she went farther than usual into the foothills. Such a nice day. And then she's rounding this hill, and there are these big boulders at the base of this hill. Clambering over the boulders, she comes around and catches her breath, because just a short distance away there were 2 sheep, and then beside them 2 cows and 2 goats and 2 pigs, and then the rest of the circle was made by wild animals. And in the center of the circle was a very old woman and a very old man. And they saw her and they beckoned to her. And the animals parted, and in just 2 steps, there she was standing in the circle with them. She bowed her head, and the old people approached. And Bhima, for that's who it was, touched her shoulder. "Lift your head, dear. Are you here alone?" Amanda nodded. And Utnik said, "How is it in the valley? Do people lie and cheat and steal?" "No," she said, "not in my lifetime." They smiled. "Perhaps," they said, "we could return." And then she saw their eyes look past her, and their faces darkened with anger. "The first thing you tell us is a lie? You are not alone." And she turned, and there was that poor servant clambering around the rocks. 2 steps she was over at him. "What have you done? I told you not to come." And she shoved him, and he hit his head on the rocks and fell down unconscious at her feet. She turned to try to explain if she could to Bhima and Utnik, but they disappeared. All the animals were gone. She lifted him. He was heavy for her. Took her a very long time to carry him back to the valley. They bound his head. They nursed him, but he was never the same again. The people wept because the best among them had failed to live up to this law of love. They wept, but they did not give up. They kept that intention, and they are still trying to this day because they know that if they could ever live up to this law, then Bhima and Utnik, who are still out there somewhere, would come back and live among them once again. And that is the story that I learned from Al Chica. And now... And now, here comes Kelvin Keraga. Oh, before Kelvin comes up, on behalf of Kelvin and Betty and myself, I would like to say thank you to Caffe Lena. Yes. Thank you to Sarah and Reese and Joe and everybody in the kitchen and the volunteers. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, thank you. So now, here comes Kelvin, and we are going to do a folk tale that Kelvin has written, and I want to tell you that Kelvin's writing is going very well. The National Storytelling Network is going to feature one of his ghost stories on their Halloween webcast, and he has a story that's in finals for a national
Tiferet
prize.
Journal, yes, Tiferet Journal. It's a finalist in a contest. So.
Go, Kelvin.
Thank you, thank you. Well, you know, Betty talked about the idea of taking a single word and crafting it into a beautiful story, and Siri's talked about how we need to take a look at the stories from cultures all over the world and acknowledge them, but unfortunately, I've had this horrible habit over the years of taking these whole folk tales, perfectly respectable folk tales, and kind of running them through a blender. If there was any moral lessons to be learned from them, I have no idea. It's lost somewhere, but anyway, this is what you're about to endure. So the first one we're going to do is called The Princess and the Glass Mountain.
A Scandinavian folktale, but I'm supposed to be on that side and you're supposed to be on this side, right?
I am. There we go.
All right.
And it goes like this.
Let's see, how does it go? Oh, yes. Once, in a country located out beyond the land of reason, there was a king.
He was the kindest, bravest, most compassionate king that ever lived.
In his own mind.
Well, I am the most popular king that ever lived. Everyone knows that.
In reality, he was a cold, cruel, and totally self-absorbed despot. This is audience participation. Can we have a boo here for this bad king? Yes. Well, his terrible exploits had been documented by an angry rebel who had even brought a lawsuit against this king before the royal court.
Where the king was the sole judge. This did not fare so well for the rebel who was last seen purchasing a ticket for the tour of the castle dungeon.
The king considered himself a great hunter.
Yes, when I hunt, every species is an endangered species.
His reputation as a great hunter flourished when he hired a sharpshooter named Regis to do the actual shooting for him.
That's right, Regis. Bring in the game and I'll cut you a check.
One day, out hunting, which meant for the king, point out things for Regis to shoot, they came across a troll.
Who are you?
Fortunately, he did not point his finger at the troll when he asked the question.
Listen, little troll, I am the king, and I've got no time for long pauses in this story. Now, explain yourself quickly and do it immediately.
The troll started to reply, but the king's haughty demeanor pissed him off. He decided then and there he was not going to say another word.
Then Regis spoke up.
Your Majesty, you have never caught a troll before. Now, if you were to take him back to the castle and put him on display in a cage, why, it would offer your subjects proof of your magnificent hunting skills.
So be it. Put him in a cage and I'll cut you a check.
The king's guards seized the troll.
He was taken into the kingdom and put into an iron cage for all to see.
Feast your eyes, ladies and gentlemen, on the horrific troll captured by the brave exploits of our beloved king.
The king stared back at the townspeople and decided not to say another word.
You mean the troll?
The troll did. Yes, the troll. Aha! But since Ticketmaster put a large surcharge on tickets to see the troll, very few people came anyway.
We interrupt this folktale now with breaking news. War has broken out between our so-called beloved kingdom and another fictitious country. The king has taken to the field where his pointing skills are sorely needed. Sources say that the king is expected to be gone for several years. He sends his best wishes to all and has issued a decree. Whosoever shall freeth the troll shall be sliced and diced into bite-sized bits, and his heart delivered to the king on a plate.
The king had a son named Leaf. Now, you know, they say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Well, this apple must have bounded down a slope, tumbled into a ravine, and bounded out into a sunny meadow because young Prince Leaf was a sweet, kind, and brave young boy. Can we have an ah here?
He deserved that. Prince Leaf had passed all the storytelling requirements listed in the category Young Hero at an Early Age, as listed in the Fairy Tale Rulebook, page 12, if you have the paperback edition.
Now, for some reason never fully explained by his parents or by the writers of this story, young Prince Leaf was given a gold apple for his birthday. This was not exactly high on his wish list, but he learned to play with it, tossing it up in the air.
A long fly apple into left field.
And catching it.
Out.
Well, one day, young Prince Leaf was walking along, tossing the ball up into the air, the apple up into the air, when it hit a limb of a tree and bounded into the troll's cage. Well, the troll tossed it back out.
This was fun. Prince Leaf tossed it back in, and the troll tossed it out. And together, the troll and the boy invented a game they decided to call playing catch. Finally, and for the first time since he'd been captured, the troll spoke up.
Hey, listen, Bob, you know, you look like a good kid, but I gotta tell you, your dad is not my favorite guy. And I'm not so crazy about spending all my time hanging out in this cage either. So I'll tell you what, if you go get the key and free me, maybe I'll show up later in the story and do you a favor. What say?
The boy thought this was a good idea and went to get the key.
Unfortunately, due to kingdom security protocols, we can't tell you how he got the key, but he did. He freed the troll, who thanked him and went on his merry way.
Years passed. Prince Leaf grew into a handsome and heroic young man, meeting the specifications in the Fairy Tale Rulebook, page 43, paperback edition.
We won't tell you what they are. You know what they are already, I'm sure.
Now time for a quiz. Could we have a volunteer from the audience? Oh, come on.
Come on.
Alexis, can you be a volunteer from the audience?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Okay,
Now
very
we have a quiz. Now, this is worth 100 points. The points are worthless, but here goes.
When the king returned home after several years away from the kingdom, what were his first words to his wife? A, how have you been, my love? My heart soars to see you. No. B, have you missed me as I missed you, my dear, when my heart almost broke with the longing to see you again? No. Or C, is the troll still locked up? Yes. Yay, very good.
When the king learned that the troll had escaped, he ordered an immediate investigation. He issued subpoenas for everyone in the kingdom. And because the subpoenas were written on the sides of axe blades, everyone showed up.
Well, they could not make any headway at all on the escape until
Prince Leaf, caught up in one of those I cannot tell a lie moods, stepped forward.
Dad, 'twas I.
Why, son, your honesty moves me deeply, deeply. It really, really does.
Guards, seize him, take him in the forest, cut out his heart, put it on a plate and deliver it to me, and I'll cut you a check.
The king's guards seized the boy and took him out. When they reached the forest, however, the guards began to have second thoughts about carrying out the king's command.
Jeez, I don't know, you know. I mean, geez, killing a king's son. I mean, it's bound to have liability issues. Come back and bite us in the behind. Yeah, and you know, I can't afford a good lawyer, you know. I'll tell you what. Why don't you go get a pig's heart and we'll deliver that to the king instead?
Get a pig's heart. Where am I going to get a pig's heart? Online.
Online, that's it. Now go. And you, kid, you gotta leave and you gotta not come back. And I don't mean just going off in the woods and camping out and writing crappy madrigals on your lute and then running back to mama like everything's gonna be okay, because it ain't big time. So you gotta go and not come back. Got it?
Have a heart.
We're getting one. Now go.
When the guards returned to the castle, they offered the pig's heart to the king as proof of the boy's death.
Fortunately, the king had, the YouTube video, how to tell a pig's heart from a human heart. Hadn't seen it. He was too busy watching the naughty barmaids videos.
The king cut the guards a check, and that was that.
Well, meanwhile, out in the forest, young Prince Leaf felt terribly lost. Because he was terribly lost. But then he saw a tall fir tree high on a hill overlooking the area. At first, it looked very hard to climb, but then he saw that it was a cell tower, actually disguised to look like a tree, and it had rungs going up the side.
They're getting better at these things, but they ain't there yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, he climbed it, and when he got to the top of his canopy of rubberized electrified foliage, he saw there was another kingdom across the way. He'd heard that there was an outside world. There was proof.
He headed for that kingdom, and when he got there, he asked for and received work on a dairy farm.
All right, kid, listen up here. Head, tail, hooves, udder. You got it? Now get to work. And by the way, what are you, what do you do? You a rock star or something? You got to get a ragged cloak to hide your youthful, noble appearance. Geez, put something on. You look like a frickin' prince.
Time for another quiz. Another volunteer from the audience, please. Oh, come on.
All right, there we go, back there. Thank you. All right. While all this was going on, in this second kingdom lived one of the following. A librarian who collected stamps. B, a pizza delivery boy who wanted to be an actor but decided to make money instead. Or C, a beautiful, smart, and kind young princess who came of age and yet remained unattached at the same time as Prince Leaf. Yay!
Oh, she said B.
Uncanny.
What did you say, B or C? B. Oh.
Well. Yeah, that too. They're all true, yes.
Okay. So the king of this kingdom was a good man who loved his daughter.
Yeah, you know how they say that a father often puts his daughter on a pedestal? Well, this king went even farther. He put his daughter on top of a glass mountain, and he declared that whoever shall climb the glass mountain and pay his respects to her would win her.
Several young suitors attempted the climb, but it was useless. This glass mountain was perfectly smooth and steep and covered with inspirational signs that said things like, "Forget it," and "No way you will make it," and "Go home."
So they all gave up pretty quickly, and the princess, who was getting pretty lonely at this point, resigned herself to the excellent cell service that the glass mountain provided, assisted, of course, by the mysterious fir tree in the distance.
When Prince Leaf, though, looked up and saw her, his heart leaped. Fortunately, he caught it before it went too far. And then he just stood gazing up in wonder at the beautiful young princess.
Yeah, I mean, that had that love at first sight thing as recited in page 2 of the fairy tale rule book, paperback edition.
But Prince Leaf realized that in his current state he had nothing to offer her and no way to climb the glass mountain. So he sank into a dismal funk. Then one day, as he was milking a cow, the troll showed up.
Hey, Bob, why so sad?
Prince Leaf explained the situation. The troll rolled his eyes.
Ah, no biggie, no biggie. Look here. Boom. There is a suit of armor that will fit you perfectly. Boom. There's a magical steed to ride up the glass mountain. And boom. Here is a copy of my latest book, Troll Cooking. 100 recipes thought up while trapped in a cage with nothing else to do.
Now, as the saying there goes, people who live on top of glass mountains should not throw stones or ride horses up them because, hey, it's glass. You don't want to break it.
Yeah, so you might think that Prince Leaf was stupid to climb up the glass mountain, but Prince Leaf had read his script in advance. And he knew that there was nowhere in this folktale where a horrific, shattering disaster occurs.
Yeah.
So he just galloped right up.
Heroes often get to read the entire script beforehand.
Yeah, that's why they're so brave.
Yeah, and why they look like they know. Because they do.
Well, the people that lived below the castle led very frugal lives, so they were thrilled to be hired as extras in this folktale.
Yeah. They all watched in well-rehearsed amazement.
As Prince Leaf, resplendent in his shining armor,
Astride his magnificent steed,
climbed up the glass mountain,
bowed to the young princess,
who immediately experienced that love at first sight thing too,
then charged back down the mountain.
and disappeared in the woods.
Can we have some applause now, please?
Yay! Well, at first, the king challenged the ruling on the field, but after instant replay, he declared that indeed the mysterious stranger had won his daughter.
But who was he? A buzz went through the kingdom, but no one stepped forward. So the king sought him out. He ordered all the men in the kingdom to come to his court, and he offered free donuts with chocolate sprinkles, and so everyone showed up.
Well, at first, the princess could not see the handsome young stranger in the crowd.
Until her eyes spotted a ragged youth back in the crowd, at the back of the crowd in a ragged cloak.
She decided that this folktale had gone on long enough. She strolled up to the farmhand, pulled off the cloak, and there was Prince Leaf, resplendent in yet another suit of clothes provided by the troll and tailored by Armani.
They married and lived happily ever after.
The glass mountain was converted into a theme park, which was run by the troll, but unfortunately had to be closed down after several injuries on the rides.
As a result, the troll was imprisoned in yet another cage.
He is currently working on his second cookbook. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. I think that's right. Good, okay. The second story is from the Philippines, sort of. Came over on the boat anyway. It's called The Adventures of Juan Passong, and it goes like this. Long ago, there lived a clever young peasant in the Philippines named Juan Passong. He was also very handsome, but
unfortunately, he bore a striking resemblance to the great pirate Halim Hokdum, which didn't help him so well with the job interviews. But he decided he was going to make his fortune very quickly at an early age by simply marrying the daughter of the great chieftain of the land, the Datu. Now, the Datu was yet another cruel and evil tyrant, and Juan knew that he was unlikely to give his daughter away to a poor peasant, but Juan also knew that the Datu suffered from an affliction common to tyrants like himself, that of not knowing he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. So Juan had a plan, and he set about carrying it out. The Datu had a herd of prized cattle. They were his sacred cows. But they were guarded by a royal herder who was known for snoring his way through his watch. So in the dark of night, Juan slipped into the meadow where the cows were and snipped off their tails, ouch, 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 and then herded them up the hill into the forest, where his friend Miguel was waiting and had promised to keep the cows hidden out of sight in the forest till he got a signal from Juan. Then Juan went back down in the meadow, picked up all the tails, and he went to work. In the morning, the locals were astonished to see a row of piles of dirt with tails sticking out. They immediately called for the Datu soldiers, and the soldiers came and promptly arrested the royal herder and asked the Datu if he would come at once, and the Datu arrived with his daughter along with him.
Well, sir, said the commander, I hate to tell you this, sir, but I'm sorry to say, but it appears that your royal herder murdered all of your cows and buried them with their posteriors sticking up. Their posteriors? Yeah, yes, sir, they're nether regions. So they're nether... You mean their butts? Yes, sir, their hindquarters. Their butts, say it, their butts. Yes, sir, their butts. Yeah, their butts. And you, royal herder, you murdered my cows and planted them in the ground with their butts sticking up. Put him into the bamboo cage and drop him out to sea tomorrow. Now, you see, whenever somebody offended the Datu, it was his custom to put them into a bamboo cage, hang the cage from a tall tree near the ocean so that all could see his humiliation, and then the next day lower the cage, put it in the ship, and drop it out to sea. This form of torture had been evaluated by the International Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Executioners, and it was rated J for jolly good fun, and it was the Datu's favorite. But as they were starting to take the royal herder away, Juan stepped forward. "Oh, great Datu," he said, "I beg your indulgence to let me speak." All eyes turned to Juan. "Oh, great Datu, we know of your incredible powers, your incredible ability to make magic happen. We have seen the way you can make an entire feast disappear from a table. We've seen how you can make the eyes of the snake rattle across the floor. And at the slightest glance from you, great Datu, the most beautiful women in the kingdom fervently wish you a long and wonderful trip to the far ends of the world. But I fear this time, great Datu, you have been deceived. Look!" And he plucked all the tails up. "You see, they were not murdered or buried. They were stolen from you. But have no fear. I can get them back for you. I happen to have the ability to speak the ancient cow language, and I can draw them back to you immediately." "You can do that?" "Yes, sir, of course. I can do it in an instant. But I do ask it in turn for returning all of this wealth to you that I ask one small favor, and that is to marry your daughter." Now, the daughter, who for reasons of her own decided to remain anonymous in this folktale, looked at Juan and thought that, to escape the evil clutches of her greedy father to marry a handsome young peasant wasn't such a bad future for her. And besides, she could always reevaluate her options later on. So she looked at Juan and gave him a big smile. Well, the Datu looked at Juan too, but he did not trust this handsome young man who bore a striking resemblance to the pirate Halim Haktum. But nevertheless, he said, "If the Datu declares that you will marry my daughter, then you will marry my daughter." Now, this wasn't exactly a signed and sealed contract, and the wording was a little bit dicey, but Juan decided to go for it. He stood in the middle of the meadow and spoke in an ancient bovine language that he made up on the spot. Roll 'em, roll 'em. At that signal, Miguel sent the cows prancing down into the meadow, and they stood there in front of the Datu. And Juan said, well, there you go, great Datu. And now I ask your indulgence to marry your daughter. If the great Datu declares that you will marry my daughter, then you will marry my daughter.
But the great Datu does not declare you will marry my daughter. How dare you think I would give my daughter away to a lowly, dirty peasant just for doing the things that you are obligated to do for your Datu anyway? Insolence! Put him in the bamboo cage.
So they seized Juan, they put him in the bamboo cage, they hung it from the tall tree with plans to drop it off the next day in the middle of the ocean, and Juan was left to his fate. But it just so happened that the great pirate Halim Hakdum was sailing by and saw a man in a bamboo cage suspended from a tree. Now, this was interesting because many of his most efficient and bloodthirsty crew members had come out of such cages. So he ordered his men to bring him ashore and stood under the cage and asked the gentleman if he could please explain his situation. Juan looked down at the pirate and thought quickly, Oh, sir, thank you for asking. I have to tell you I've been assigned a terrible, terrible, terrible fate. The Datu has decreed that I should spend all day suspended in this cage and all night too. And then tomorrow they're going to lower the cage down and take me away to marry his beautiful daughter.
Oh, I know. She's incredibly rich, and I know that she's rapturously beautiful to look at, but I'm a free spirit. I long to roam the world and see the sights and not be tied down by unimaginable wealth and ravishing beauty.
She is rich. Oh, yes. And very nice to look at. Oh, unbelievably. Well, you know, I notice that you bear a striking resemblance to the great pirate Halim Hakdum. And I myself I've tired of roaming the world. I would like to settle down in a nice, cozy little kingdom of my own. So I will give you a galley and a small chest of gold coins and silver and jewels that have been donated to me in my travels, and I will take your place.
You would do that for me?
I don't know what to say. And so, as so often happens in folk tales and Shakespeare plays, two characters look exactly alike, switch places. In the morning, the soldiers came and they lowered the cage and they took it out to sea in a galley and they dropped it in the ocean, sending the pirate not to his wedding, but to his funeral. Well, that afternoon, though, the Datu and his daughter were lounging around the royal chamber, and in walked Juan carrying a great big sea chest.
Oh, great Datu, he said. It is wonderful to see you. Here I am, Juan Passong, returned from the dead. No, just kidding. No, it was your wonderful cage. Why, it was magical. It was magical. Why, I went down to the bottom of the ocean and I was perfectly fine. And when I got there, I found that the whole surface of the bottom of the ocean was covered with jewels and gold and silver. Look. And he poured the chest out on the floor. Now, great Datu, I just ask your indulgence for one more favor. If you would just lend me another one of your magical cages, and then I can go back and I can claim all of those riches and wealth for myself.
No, said the Datu. You will not go back down in the cage. Soldiers, put me in the bamboo cage. Well, of course, you're royal obliviousness, if that's what you wish, said Juan, and I'd be happy to lend you my galley for the journey out.
So they put the Datu into a bamboo cage, and Juan and his daughter climbed in the galley with the soldiers, and they took it out to sea, and they dropped the cage over the side and waited. And waited. Finally, Juan said, well, I don't know. I guess sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't. The daughter said, yeah, well, goodbye, Dad. And then she turned to Juan and she said, you know, ever since I was a little girl, I've always dreamed of being married to a pirate. Thank you all. All right, one more for you now. Just close the show, I think.
Yep.
I should tell you all, while we're taking a minute here, that Siri and I are also going to be doing this October, next month, I guess it is still, a series of ghost stories called Whispering Bones, which we've done for 11 years now. We did it here last year during the COVID. This year we're going to do it on 16th at Old Castle Theater. The 23rd at the Ashfield Theater in Ashfield, Massachusetts. We're going to do it at the Cambridge Argyle Brewery in Cambridge on the 29th, and we do it on Halloween night at the 8th Step. So I hope if you're into that kind of thing. It's a lot of fun. It's funny stories. It's serious stories. It's a mix. So I hope you'll come and see it. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And this story is from Denmark, I think it is, right?
Yes, and just in the interest of how many different kinds of ways you can tell this, Claire Nolan, I don't think I told you, told this same story at Wordplays, which is our online once-a-month thing, just last, when was it? Sunday a week ago.
So apologies to her for what we're about to do. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Once, long ago, in the country of Denmark, there lived a rich widow named Mrs. Hansen. She was known to her friends as Good Mistress Hansen.
And to the local villagers as the Greedy Spider.
She had married a wealthy farmer who had tragically
and conveniently
passed away, leaving her with a large estate and a young, beautiful daughter,
Loreen,
whose affections she guarded most carefully. Let's just say that Larry knew there was such a thing as men in the world, but had no idea what they were for. A question which has been puzzling women since the dawn of time. But one day, a handsome
and stalwart
young man named Hans came walking down the road and saw Larry working in the garden. Immediately, he fell in love.
In a very stalwart way.
And determined at once to marry her.
I must marry Loreen. I must go and ask her loving mother for her hand.
He sought out Good Mistress Hansen, finding her after a long search, partaking of liquid refreshment in a local drinking establishment. She was half in the bag.
She was all the way in the bag.
No, she couldn't even find the bag. But Hans was too stalwart to take notice. He stepped right up and announced his intentions.
I have come to ask for your daughter's hand. I am very stalwart, and I am going to marry Loreen.
She stared at him for a moment and then delivered a full roundhouse smack on the side of his stalwart face.
Ouch!
Was that so? Well, yeah, you can marry Loreen. You can marry her after you've traveled to the end of the earth and back. That's when you can marry old Lorena Rooney.
Lorena Rooney. Well, I never knew her middle name before, and your customs are a bit painful, but very well. I will travel to the end of the earth and back.
Good luck with that, stale tart.
Hans immediately went home and told his mother that he was going to marry Loreen.
His mother was overjoyed.
But at first he must travel to the end of the earth and back.
His mother was underjoyed. But she sighed and did what all good mothers do when their sons set off for the end of the earth. She made him a great big lunch, packed it in a brown paper bag, and wrote Hans on the outside of it so that he wouldn't accidentally mix it up with the lunches of all the other stalwart young men heading to the end of the earth whom he might encounter along the way.
Hans hiked
and hiked
and hiked
and hiked.
and hiked until he found himself in front of a farmhouse. A woman was standing in the yard counting her children.
14, 15, 6.
Hello there.
Oh, hey, you haven't seen a young maiden around here, have you?
No.
Strangest thing, I could swear I had another daughter, but I just can't seem to find her. Pretty thing. I kind of missed her. Are you sure you haven't seen her?
Oh, no, I just got here, but I am traveling to the end of the earth, and I promise I'll ask around for her when I get there.
Hans hiked
And marched
and loped
and strolled.
and
Trudged.
sidled, I think.
Sidled and trudged. Yes, he did. He did. Yes. And trudged until he came to a sentry.
Another farm?
No, another farm. That's right. He didn't come to the sentry yet. Oh, he started to head for the sentry, but he got lost on his path, and he actually wandered through the woods, and he came to another farm. The farmer was staring at a strange tree. Hello there. I'm going to the end of the earth, and I'm very hungry, and I would appreciate a bite to eat.
Oh, sure. Come on in. Hey, say, maybe when you get to the end of the earth, you could find someone to tell me what's going on with that tree.
He pointed to the tree.
See now, half the leaves are yellow and half the leaves are red. Every time I look at it, I want to order a hot dog with mustard and ketchup.
And they haven't even been invented yet.
I know. It's driving me crazy. Let's see what you can find out, okay?
Hans agreed to help the farmer, and he treated him to a delicious feast-like box lunch. And then Hans headed on his way. He marched
And ambled
and strolled
and sidled
and trudged.
until he came to a wide river. And on the banks of the river was a guardhouse, and in the guardhouse a sleepy sentry who blinked his eyes as Hans approached.
Oh, the end of the earth, huh? Well, there it is over there across the river. But you better take that rowboat over there. Alligators. You don't usually see alligators at the end of the earth, but this is a folk tale, and anything can happen here. And by the way, when you get there, can you find out when my relief is coming? I've been staying here a long time. 699 years, 10 months, 28 days, 6 hours, and 15 minutes. Oh, I'm not complaining or anything. It's just your feet kind of get sore when you've been standing a long time. So I'd appreciate if you could find out when my shift is up.
Hans rowed across the river. And, well, as you all know, it has been proven by a variety of expertly written folk tales that at the end of the earth, there is a large castle owned and operated by an evil dwarf.
I wouldn't use the word evil to describe myself. I prefer the politically correct term, morally disabled.
And so it was. When Hans rowed across and saw the end of the earth, there was the great castle, which, like so many roadside attractions, was neither great nor a castle, but really a dumpy stone building with a tiny souvenir shop.
Inside the shop was a pretty young maiden named Britta.
Hello. Welcome to the end of the earth. Would you like to buy a postcard?
Oh, no. You see, I promised Lorene's mother that I would travel to the end of the earth and back, so if you don't mind, I'll just get one of these. I traveled to the end of the earth and back, but all I got was this stupid t-shirts, and then I could go back and I could marry Lorene.
You came to the end of the earth from where?
From the whole earth, and I got the catalog to prove it, too. Oh, it was a long way. I passed a woman who lost her daughter and wanted me to see if I could find her here, and a farmer that had a strange tree with yellow leaves on one side and red on the other, and I'm supposed to find out why that is. And then I met a sentry that had been at his post for 700 years and wanted me to find out when he was getting relieved. I'm supposed to help all those people, but all I got was a stupid t-shirt.
Well, listen, sweetie, maybe before you go, you could help me. You see, I've been kept here against my will by an evil, a morally disabled dwarf, and I haven't had a customer since I got here. It's kind of dull, and I'd really like to get home.
well, maybe I could rescue you.
Yeah.
But you have to help me find answers for all these people because I promised them and I am very stalwart.
Well, that is very nice of you, and I appreciate your concern for them, so I will help you. But, you know, being stalwart is not quite enough. We're going to need some trickery. But I think I can find a way to beguile the dwarf. My father was a smith.
Oh, a blacksmith.
No, a wordsmith. Now be quiet and let me think, or I will edit your dialogue.
She thought dark and treacherous thoughts.
I've got a plan. But I'm going to have to turn you into a candlestick.
A candlestick.
Yep.
You're not going to light me, are you?
Yes, but you won't feel a thing.
Will my hair catch fire?
No. This is a spell, like in a folk tale. You've heard folk tales, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, I've been to Caffe Lena before, but you know, please don't let me burn down to a little nub. I have enough trouble when it's cold as it is.
She didn't like the direction this conversation was taking, so she quickly turned him into a candlestick, and they waited for the dwarf's return. When he arrived, he was in a foul mood.
Oh, what a terrible day it was. You know what the other dwarfs down at the mine started to call me? Grumpy. Me, grumpy. Oh, I gave it right back to him. I said, that is insulting. That is demeaning. Now you take that back, dopey. Oh, I was ready to duke it out with him right there. But those Disney people were there. You know how they are. Everybody's got to play nice in the sandbox for good old Walt.
But Britta soothed him and fed him a big meal and called him her dwarfykins, and after a while he calmed down. Then she picked up a stalwart candlestick and they headed upstairs. She put the candlestick right next to the bed where it could hear everything. Then she said good night to dwarfykins and they settled in to sleep.
Hey, what the hey? You're snoring.
What?
You're snoring. Jeez, you woke me up. You were so loud.
Oh, I'm sorry. You see, I was having this dream about this mother with a lot of children who was looking for a lost daughter.
Oh, yeah, I know what that's all about. That was your ma, who I kidnapped you from you when you was little. But you ain't never gonna see her again, so just get that dream out of your pretty little head, and let's get some shut-eye. Right?
All right.
Right.
Good night.
Oh, God. Hey, there you go again, waking me up with your snoring.
Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry, but I was having another dream. I was dreaming about a farmer who had a tree where half the leaves were yellow and half the leaves were red.
yeah, I know about that. Yeah, you see, there's 12 barrels of gold buried under the side with the yellow leaves and 12 barrels of silver buried under the side with the red leaves. But I ain't gonna tell that to that old fart who owns the place. Let him figure that out for himself, okay? Now, let's get our 40 winks, all right?
All right. Good night.
All right, good night.
Oh, God, what do you got up there? A couple of chainsaws up your nostrils? I can't sleep through that racket.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I had another dream. This one was about a sentry who'd been on his post for 700 years and didn't know when his relief was coming.
That guy, yeah, he's as dumb as a fence post. Geez, all he's got to do is when the next guy comes along, he just has to call out, at last, you couldn't come too fast. And that guy becomes the sentry forever and a day. But look, you got to forget all these dreams. We got to get some sleep. We got to get some Z's, all right?
Good night.
All right, good night.
She turned to Hans and whispered, Hans, don't forget.
What'd you say?
I said, hens, don't forget. Hens just remember to lay their eggs every day.
Well, you better not forget to fry them like tomorrow. Now, let's get some sleep, all right? Good night. And so they fell asleep.
In the morning, after the dwarf had left to renegotiate his contract with the Disney people, Hans and Britta slipped out of the house. When they reached the guardhouse, they explained to the sentry what he had to do and continued on their way.
When the dwarf discovered that Britta was gone, he let out a dwarf-sized bellow and went after her. He swam across the river with folktale alligators nipping at him, but as so often happens in folktales, not quite getting him. He started across the path past the sentry house, but when the sentry saw him, he called out, at last, you couldn't come too fast.
Instantly, the dwarf became the new sentry, bound to serve forever and a day, while the old sentry went off to celebrate his release at an enchanted microbrewery. The Disney people hired an understudy to play the part of Grumpy.
The understudy, whose real name was Max Schellengullen, had a successful career, appearing in Lord of the Rings, The Wizard of Oz,
And as an axe murderer on All My Children.
Hans and Britta reached the farm with the strange tree, and Britta told the farmer where to dig, and they dug up 12 barrels of gold and 12 barrels of silver. The farmer was so overjoyed he announced they would split the treasure 3 ways, which even after taxes was still a sizable sum. Hans bought a luxurious mobile home that got terrible gas mileage, but he didn't care, he was rich, and they headed for Britta's house.
Britta was joyously reunited with her mother and her many brothers and sisters, and with her share of the gold and silver, she purchased a new home for the family, a beautifully renovated old shoe that had just come on the market.
Yes, it's one of Betty's
That's
shoes, in fact.
exactly
Yeah.
what I was thinking, but not saying. Yes.
Yeah, it was. Yes, when Hans arrived home, Lorene gave him a articulate and expressive welcome.
Where exactly is it you have been all this time? I mean, it was the end of the earth, not the frickin' moon you were going to, and what, you couldn't call me or write me or text me or send a messenger?
Alas,
Even-
Lorene
I
had a
just left you
sharp
by
tongue,
myself all day.
but Hans married her, and he listened to her, and he endured her barbs because he was stalwart.
Stalwart.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, my book club.